We are live.
All righty. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Doing this without my computer is so weird. But anyway, tonight we're on episode 263, and we're going to do some wildfire wisdom. It is that time of year where, as we were just talking beforehand, it's our general annual reminder that things are getting drier and it's time to start paying a little bit more attention when you're out there setting up your campfires and stuff like that. In a lot of Canada, at least, burn restrictions are starting to come into effect. I know here in Nova Scotia, where I'm at, it's actually like, it's not a high, but it's a moderate day, so we can only burn from like 7 p.m. until 5 a.m. That's campfires, that's everything, right? And if that goes up to red, then we can't burn at all. And then if it goes any higher than that, of course, they're going to put in a full fire restriction. Even when it's green here in Nova Scotia, we're only allowed to burn from 2 p.m. to 5 a.m. There's nothing from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., right? And that's all based on science and crap like that, but we've done episodes on that in the past, which might have been a touch dry if listeners remember, but it's good information. If you do want to go back and you're interested in a whole bunch of factual information, there's an episode back there, and I encourage you to go back and listen to it. But for today's episode, remember, folks, things are getting dry. We're going to be a little more aware when we're going to be burning. So let's talk about some of our fire safety and maybe a few alternatives so that when you are out there and if you don't feel it's safe to make fires, because today when I was out in the woods, I went for a walk, it absolutely wasn't safe to make a fire. There's several fires going on in the province already here in Nova Scotia, which is weird. Down in Fall River, they have like 8 departments out on a fire. There's a couple down home, Pictou County way. It's that time, man. It's starting. Like it's getting dry. Things are crunchy. The wind is up. There's no leaves on the tree yet. The fresh grass hasn't come through. So everything that's out there, it's just drying. There's no new vegetation yet. We haven't reached what's called green up, which is exactly that, just where you get the grass and you get the leaves and stuff like that. Once green up happens, the danger goes down a tiny bit. But until then, you're basically sitting on a tinder pile. And of course, we had Hurricane Fiona and things like that in the past, which is making a whole lot more of the matchstick process that's going on in the woods, which is even more to be aware of. Because if your fire gets away, now it's not just a bush or something like that could be on fire. It's incredibly easy to create an entire forest fire. And we've seen that in the past here in this province at least several times with like Porter's Lake Fire. There's the Spry Field fires. These are all fires that, while some of them are still pending investigation, there's a few other ones I haven't mentioned yet because they're still under investigation. But some of the fires I mentioned, they were caused by campfires, innocent people doing innocent things that went bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even out here, we didn't get as much snow last winter as they expected, so there is talk that there will be fire bans much more, and the full expectation is that we will potentially have a much harder time of it again this year with fires. So with a potentially drier forest and a heightened risk of forest fires, obviously we need to take extra care. It takes a lifetime for a forest to fully rebuild.
And funny enough, I was thinking about this topic here. Ben and I, we normally touch base earlier in the day, and we have a quick chat about what we're going to talk about. And I mentioned this topic, and as I'm driving back, if anybody hasn't noticed, I'm not home. Funny thing, but I'm up in Halifax or down in Halifax, whichever way you want to look at it, depending on which province you're in. And where I'm staying is actually out through Porter's Lake area, where there was a fire back in 2013, and we're talking like literally 11 years ago. And as I'm driving through there, like it's still very evident that a forest fire went through that area. Like 11 years and you can still drive by and be like, man, this looks weird. Obviously, I was on the fire. I know it's a fire, but just going through it, you'd be like, something happened here. It's just green enough and enough fresh vegetation that it's hiding a lot of the black marks. But like your big timbers and stuff are all gone. It's a weird little wasteland out there. You know what I mean? And there's some more, once again, towards Bedford and Lady Ham's Plains. Once again, folks, if you don't know the area I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Anyway, it's out past the city. There was massive forest fires that went through there last year, and those look still apocalyptic if you've ever been out in the woods in those areas. Like, Ben's not kidding. It takes a long time for stuff to grow back, especially if it was hardwood trees and stuff like that. Those things could take hundreds of years to come back the proper way. Black spruce, red spruce, things like that, built 50 years. But still, I'm not going to live to see new growth in that area last. I mean, I hope I do, but the chances are I'm not going to see a full forest there again. You know what I mean? So maybe my kids will enjoy it, but that's the reality. One little spark just went astray, and now there's massive forest missing.
And you're right. There's a whole maturing of a forest. I mean, it starts with the small brush, the fast-growing greenery, and usually the low brush, and then the larger trees. You know, oftentimes it's the evergreens and stuff that'll sprout up pretty quick, and then if the area is right, a hardwood forest may eventually, you know, peak up over the top of that greenery and establish a more strong base there. And that mixed forest is what will produce a really healthy environment. We've talked before about monoculture, mono forests with one or two tree types. It's not as healthy as one that has a proper mix. And there's tons of people that can give you really good breakdowns on that. But it does take years for a forest to fully grow back to the way you would have remembered it when you first seen it. So if you are probably a 10-year-old child and you watch a forest burn down, probably around the time when you're 50, 60, 70, you might start to look at it and say, this reminds me a lot of the forest that was here when I was a kid. But you're right, like the biggest trees, they can be multi-generation before you'll see them to the full size.
So yeah, definitely it's time to get out there, be a little bit more responsible. And in no way, shape, or form are we saying, don't get out there and don't burn. I mean, be smart about it. Don't get me wrong. And starting off with that is definitely check your local regulations. Like I'm just talking about the ones here in Nova Scotia. I know most of Atlantic Canada falls on the same kind of deal there. And I know there is regulations clear across Canada on when you can burn, what you should burn, and all that good stuff. Definitely check your local regulations. That's where you're going to start. See if it's safe to burn, see where you can burn, and potentially there may be some times allowed to that. Now, I am going to have a little caveat here and say, because I always get this question, every year when we do our, pay attention because things are dry fire thing, there's one person out there that always goes, well, what if it was a survival situation? So I'll answer that first and foremost. In a survival situation, all bets are off. You do what you do to stay alive. Don't burn the woods down, but I'm sure nobody is going to give you that hard of a time if you had to make a little fire to stay warm through the night, providing you did it correctly and smart. You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. The problem is a lot of these regulations and stuff come into effect because they're dividing to the lowest common denominator. Ben and I joke about this all the time. There's no such thing as common sense anymore, folks. Common sense went out the window years ago. There's only acquired knowledge, and the problem is everything that we used to take as common sense, that knowledge isn't getting passed along as well as it used to. So the acquired knowledge is starting to thin out a lot. You know what I mean? We're in a digital world. People can play with computers and stuff significantly better than they can go out in the woods and make a safe fire. You know what I mean? That's why we're here. Hopefully give you guys a little reminder and a little slap in the butt to keep you straight and narrow. But ultimately, that's all this is some safety. So we check our local regulations. We find out, oh, hey, we can burn. We still can't just, throw a fire on the floor of the forest there and expect everything to be right. Like, you got to do a little bit of site prep. You should actually do a little more site prep this time of year, simply because you are getting into that dry time of year where you can get some fires that may actually burn down a little bit. You know what I mean? They could get into some root systems. They could burn in the duff moisture. You may think your fire's all fine and dandy. You pack up, you leave, and a couple days later something sparks up. That becomes even a bigger risk towards the fall and stuff like that, but it's still possible this time of year as well. So you want to do a little site prep for your area there. So if you are going to have a fire outside, providing that it's legal and you're not breaking any kind of bylaws or policies or whatever to your location there, you're going to want to clean away a lot of the vegetation that's around that. So you want to get rid of all the dead leaves, dead grass, dead sticks, things like that. You want to go down to good mineral soil. So dig everything back a little bit, get down into the soil, make sure there isn't a lot of roots running through. I know a lot of people overlook this and be like, it's underground, it's not going to be a problem. But it can be a problem. You know what I mean? There's still fires burning underground in several locations that have been burning for years. People thought it would be underground and it wouldn't go anywhere. And it's still burning. I mean, Silent Hill. And we're getting a little off the different type of fires here, but prime example is the game Silent Hill or the movie, whichever way you've seen it, that's based on a real town. It was a fire that I think it was an old coal mining town. One of the mine shafts caught on fire, and that fire has been burning for like 40, 50 years underground. Yes, it's coal, but things can burn underground for long periods of time is the point here.
They have traced the forest fires back to weeks, if not months later, to a previous fire in the area that had gone down into the root system, and then when the conditions were right, managed to come back to the surface and spread. So yeah, it's definitely possible. The recommendation I've always been told is get down to mineral soil if you can. If not, try to find a place with bedrock and have the fire on a bedrock, because that's not going to spread down. That's easy to contain. Barring that, there are some other things you can kind of do, and one of the ones I've seen that I kind of like, and I don't know if it's considered good for a long-term fire, but for short-term fires, if you can lay a couple of logs down and build your fire on top of that, because at the end you can pick the logs up and just toss into the lake or the river or whatever, and it puts it completely out, and you haven't scored the ground underneath. A bigger, longer-lasting fire will burn through those couple of logs that you're building on top of, and so it won't last forever.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Just prepare your logs underneath. Be greener logs. That way they don't burn as fast. It's a great thing to do if you're going to have a quick fire. If you're just starting a quick fire to cook up your lunch or supper, something like that, absolutely great idea.
Yeah. And of course, now, so far, I think, and I'm just trying to lead this along, we've talked about how you do a regular fire, but what if a fire isn't a practical option? What if you get there and the duff is 2 and 3 feet thick? And what if everything is dry and you still have that steak that needs to be cooked? You still have that cup of coffee, or the water that needs to be made safe. And we've used filters and stuff, but a lot of meals need hot water to make. What steps should you take to still have that hot meal and get you through the night, a cold night, if fire isn't an option?
Just before we move on, Ben, quick comment here from the side. The drifting spore, we weren't allowed to burn today in my zone until 7 p.m. It took, I took a DIY alcohol stove instead of having a fire, I think is what that's supposed to be for this evening. And yeah, I think that's kind of where we're leading into. I just wanted to make sure that they knew we were looking in the comments.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the alcohol stove, the penny stove, the cat can stove, all those things we have talked quite a bit about in the past, and those are very good options. That you can still boil your water, you can still heat up some stuff. It still provides a little bit of light at night if you have to. It is an option. 100% for sure. Another thing I wanted to step, because it's one steps between, is the twig stoves. Now those I think are a gray area when it comes.
And they are, and this is what I was going to say, but I think you're covering it. Yeah. You go, Ben, and I'll save mine.
They're a gray area. If you get caught with a twig stove during a fire ban, the ranger or the police officer or whoever you come across may tell you that doesn't meet the criteria. Even though it is fully contained, it's double walled potentially. There's things protecting it. It's still a fire that's burning wood fuel, and there is a concern that maybe you'll dump the ashes improperly, or a spark will come out and still start a fire. It is definitely a safer method, and it is a gray area. You might get away with it. Check your local rules and regulations. Speak to a local expert. If possible, talk to the wardens or rangers or whoever you have in your area and see what the method is. I just wanted to make sure we covered that, because it is something people say, oh, I'll just use this, and it may or may not get you away with it. So,
no, 100%. And on that note, I know here in Nova Scotia, the way they have worded the new regulations is no open flame burning. And that gives an even broader gray area, you know what I mean? It's not just no campfires, it's no open flame burning. And depending on where you're at, like here in HRM, they have their own bylaws that go with the provincial policy. So here, you, like chimeneas, if you know what I mean, it's usually like the potbelly thing has a small chimney that comes up and a small spark arrestor. Down where I'm from, Pictou County, most times those are accepted. I haven't checked this year, so don't. If you're from Pictou County, don't go out and spark it up. I haven't looked into it this year. But in the past, they have been legal. As we're here in HRM, they're part of the burn ban. You can't use those. So check not only your local regulations, but also your municipality bylaws. Because I have known a couple people that are like, well, I was on the DNR website and it said I could burn, and they still got their $50 burning fine because they were in conflict with their local municipality bylaws. And as for the little twig stoves there, for here, like I said, in Nova Scotia anyway, that would fall under open flame burning. They would not be covered. But once again, the other thing that falls under this, I mean, and I hate that they left this such a gray area, technically the alcohol stove could be open flame burning. A propane burner could be open flame burning. And I think they really loosened this up to such a big gray area was because of how many fires we've had in the past. And this is speculation, folks. Absolute speculation. This is not evidence or hard fact, speculation only. My speculation is because of all the recent forest fires we've been having here in Nova Scotia history. Like, we've had massive, major fires, historical fires in the last 10, 11 years here in Nova Scotia. We've had a lot of them. Like, we keep seeming to outdo ourselves every single year to the point where I'm starting to wonder how much forest is left here in HRM. But yeah, so I think they kind of loosened the wording on that in the case that if something went wrong, they have a little bit more legality, liability to fall back on. So once again, folks, I can't stress this enough. Check your bylaws, check your provincial policies.
And you have to think, you said common sense has sort of gone the way of the dodo bird. It may have. And this is where somebody goes out and they set up their propane, their little whisper jet or whatever open flame stove you have, and next thing you know, they knock it over and it lands in the brush and it starts a fire, and it's just like a blowtorch at that point. And so, yeah, it becomes a major issue. So somebody tries to pick it up and it knocks it over. The ones I might question, what's the name of the one you can hold the pot while it's cooking?
Oh, that's not part of the solo stove setup. I know the one you're talking about. It's like a whole confined system where it's got the burner underneath and then the pot sits on top. It's all. I can't think of the name for the life of me, Ben.
Yeah.
You'll definitely look it up. So while Ben's looking that up, let's move back onto site prep. So like Ben said, it's easy to knock over these other alternative methods too. So not just your fire area down to mineral soil, clear a good area back. I like to go at least 1 or 2 meters, which is 3 to 6 feet. You know what I mean? If not a little further. Personally, I try to set my fires up near like rivers and stuff like that. So one, I have an ample water supply on hand in case something does go a little, dicey, something like that. Or when I want to put my fire out, I know I can drown it really good. And get into rocky ground and stuff like that. So I don't have a lot of the stuff that can burn and spread. Watch for ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are fuels that start small and get up big and can lead into trees and stuff like that. I won't burn in any areas where there's abundance of ladder fuels. Here in Nova Scotia, we got something that's called like NS/2. Scientific term, don't worry about it. But basically, it's just prime ladder fuels. You get these tall grasses, which leads to bushes, which leads to limbs, which leads to trees. And we get that all the way, we get it all over here in Nova Scotia because we're a coastal, not an island, but we're a coastal province. And the wind just kind of whips everything into that way. So just be careful about that stuff, folks.
So it's jet boil. There's also maple fire on Amazon. The flame doesn't kind of go outside of the stove. It stays inside. It heats some elements that more efficiently pull the heat out. So they're fairly efficient. They still use the little isobutane stoves or fuel canisters. But even those, improperly used, spark or flame can come out the side. You have to be careful with these things. And obviously there is a risk.
No, and that's the thing. There's always going to be risks. You're going to have to mediate that as best you can. And I like the isobutane stoves. And if you have the money, you can get the ones that have like the tip-over shut-off valves in them. Those things are great. So when they tip over, fire goes out. Those are generally pretty accepted for backpacking and stuff here in Nova Scotia as the best way to cook in the woods if you have to when there's a burn restriction on. Burn ban, I don't know. When it comes to a burn ban, the last year or two, they've basically been down to don't fire it outside because that could get you a ticket. Because once again, we've had so many forest fires lately. But I think those are the most accepted. When you look at a lot of our literature and media outlets and stuff here, they're saying like, get some sort of little stove with tip over shut off and things like that. I personally like the alcohol stoves like Spore said there, but They do have a little drawback. If they get knocked or something like that, you have all that good fuel that you can't really just shut off. You know what I mean? Penny stove, whatever you want to call it. You throw a penny over it, you snuff the whole thing out, it's good. But if you accidentally knock it over, you just released all that fuel. So, I mean, you got to be careful with anything you're going to do.
Now, something I'm going to throw out there, I do. The next time you go to the grocery store and you buy like one of those take and bake pizzas or whatever, and you get that slightly thicker aluminum pan that comes with it, that's semi-disposable. I take a piece of that, probably about, maybe 8-10 inches round, fold it up, and my MSR pot came with a similar thing. You put it underneath, it reflects heat up, but it also prevents the open flame from hitting what's going on below it. If you put your alcohol stove, your twig stove or whatever on top of this, so that any ashes or anything that falls on that and you can contain it, it is a better system. So is it going to save you from the law? I'm not making that promise, but is it going to give you an extra layer of protection? 100%. And if you're cooking on top of a picnic table, I mean, it's not a bad method. It's one I've used. I use that to protect the picnic table. So use those heat shields. Use those extra protection. If you have an extra pan, sometimes I'll put it in my frying pan. If I'm just boiling water in a pot, I'll put the whole setup in my frying pan to give that protection too. So there's almost always some options you can go with to increase your protection.
For sure. And wind guards. A lot of things have wind guards that you can put around your stove. Those actually add not only to the ability to keep your fire going and heat going up, they help for not blowing firebrands or embers or sparks, whatever you want to call them, out into the woods and stuff too. You know, a method that I've tried this year after making fun of it for so long, it's something that you've mentioned in the past, Ben.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, what do you think it is?
I'm at a loss at this moment.
Stainless steel bowl.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Guys, actually, I found a massive stainless steel bowl at Value Village, and it was like $4. I'm like, all right, I'll buy into this. And I tried it. It works fairly well. It's just a little cumbersome to carry around, but there's no weight to it. It's the size and awkwardness of it. If you can strap it to your backpack, it's really not that bad.
Well, like you said, it's not taking up that much room because it's thin. So if you're packing a bag and if it's clean enough, you can almost put your sleeping bag inside of it and then pack stuff around it. It'll fit in a pack.
Well, no. The bowl I got, Ben, will not fit in my backpack. Like, we're talking massive bowl, man. This is like the biggest bowl I've ever seen. I was like, $4? Why not?
I think the biggest one I'd seen people using was like a 24-inch, which did squeeze.
Yeah, that's what this was, about 2 feet across.
Yeah, we did squeeze it into a bigger backpack one time. So, especially if I got a big duffel bag.
My backpack.
I got a big duffel bag. I take like bike camping, so I just strap it over the panniers, and it works fine. But I don't carry a bowl. But I have tried it. I have seen it work, and it sort of reflects the heat inside, so the fire does burn better, and it protects everything out. You can get a lot more out of a lot less.
The only thing I would suggest in that instance is just smaller fires. I did find as the fire got a little more intense, the bowl had a little bit of deformation.
Yeah.
Because stainless steel is fairly thin, but I mean, small fire worked great.
Yeah.
As it got a little bigger, not so good.
Yeah, you're gonna ruin the pan, but if you paid $4 for it and you get 15-20 fires out of it.
Exactly. It was cheap enough. I was willing to give it an attempt after making fun of it, and not making fun of it, making light of it for so long. Because we started talking about this thing 2 years ago, I think, at this point.
So we've mentioned these methods, and I think they're very important methods to mention. So yes, we could use a twig stove, we could use alcohol stoves, we could use these Isbit solid fuel stoves, but all of these again are a flame, and of course that is an issue when we're worried about fire. There is a couple of methods that can heat while you're back camping that don't involve flame.
I know one. There's a couple. You go for it. I'm going to save this one in case you don't mention it.
So the one I'm thinking about is, it used to be able to get them, I think you can get them with the Army surplus kits, where I think they have sodium inside of it, and when you pull the string, it drops down into the water, it heats up the water inside this pouch, and it will heat up your meal. So
Yep.
that's so it's heating by chemical means. I guess is the best way to put it. And so you can. This is an option. It is definitely an option, and it's no different. We've talked about it. If you're cold and you can't have a fire, if you have the body warmers, the little kits, you can take a couple of those and throw in your sleeping bag, throw in your clothes, and it can heat you up. That's one of the reasons we use fire. Obviously, we can do that. So that's a method for heating up our meals. Unfortunately, with those, there's very little control. So, and if the materials, I've heard over time they may lose their efficiency, and you may not quite get a hot meal out of it, but maybe you'll get a relatively warm meal.
A lukewarm meal. And I've had one of these from an old military MRE with the self-heater in it. And it wasn't boiling hot, which people had warned me that they can become, but it was warm. I mean, it was a warm meal.
Yeah. And the other thing, I haven't seen this for cooking, but just for keeping yourself warm and stuff, and even for the light side of it, where rechargeable batteries are becoming a much more of a thing. Power packs to charge our phones and our drones and everything else we carry in. You can get heated vests and obviously LED lights. So instead of taking a lantern that burns flame or a Coleman stove, obviously your flashlights and rechargeable lanterns can partway meet some of the needs we have to replace the fire, right?
No, absolutely. So, Spore here again from the comments. I use a vegetable colander and a baking pan as a portable fire pit setup. Works really good in the snow too. So I assume he's putting the pan underneath and the colander on top and building the fire in there, and then it has air channels and stuff like that too. That would actually be a pretty efficient way of doing it as well.
Yeah, it'd be very similar to the solo stove systems. And you can get the little tiny portable ones, and we have, I think you have the same one I have, or a similar one, the rip-off that folds down in on itself. It only takes a little bit of room. And like we say, these are very efficient means of getting heat, and the flame is very contained. So yeah, the other method, if you're driving a vehicle, so if you're taking your car or you're taking your motorcycle, there have been for years snowmobiles, there is a system where you can attach a pot to your exhaust. And
I have heard, I have never seen or tried, but I have heard of this.
Princess Auto was selling it for years. I've seen them. They strap right onto the exhaust of your snowmobile, and you can cook a meal while you're driving around, and the whole container is more or less sealed. People have been known to fry eggs on the top of engines. I think if your engine's getting that hot that you're successfully frying eggs and stuff, then maybe you should check your coolant. But
I was going to say, there might be more issues coming there than the eggs.
But the fact is, sometimes you do have a heated item. So, like, if you could get it near the engine in a relatively flame-proof bag, so some kind, there is a way of potentially getting some of that heat to heat up water. Are you going to boil water? I'm not guaranteeing that. Can you get it hot enough to burn you? Absolutely. And that's the distinction I want to make, right?
Absolutely. And like I said, I've heard of people doing it. I've had people tell me they've done it. I've never tried it myself. I've heard of wrapping stuff on tinfoil and putting it in around the engine or around the muffler or whatever. It's something I've never tried.
No.
Now, an option that's available that's kind of neat, and I'm looking into getting it potentially for this summer, is the solar stoves.
Yes.
So they're kind of like the tubular things where you put your food in the tube, you seal it up. The only downside to this, you have to have some pretty bright direct sunlight. But here in Nova Scotia, at least, the summers, we've been getting more and more of it where we have this like real intense sun. So I'm thinking it might be a good idea because last year, I think like half the summer was in a burn ban. Like not just a burn restriction, burn ban. You couldn't burn, period. Don't fart in the woods, you're going to get a ticket kind of deal. So I'm going to try one of these solar stoves for going out there.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, even the solar showers. You can heat water up hot enough that it's uncomfortable in a solar shower. And anyone who doubts me, leave a black garden hose outside all day, come home in the evening before it starts to cool off, and spray that water onto your hand and tell me that it's comfortable. Especially if it's laying
Doesn't have to be a black garden hose. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it in some of my pictures and photos, but my garden hose out back, the reel, I tend to set up on top of I got like a double roof. I have a small roof that goes over my pump room out back, and I tend to set it up there because Melissa has an after-school program with kids there, and I like to put it up out of the way. Coming home at the end of the night, it's a bright green hose. The water coming out of that is very uncomfortable, so it doesn't even have to be black. The sun has a ton of heat if you're willing to put a little time into harvesting it or concentrating it or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely methods with sun. You can also get pretty good magnifying glasses. You can get the Fresnel lens, I think they call it. I've got one that's the size of a sheet of paper, so 8.5 by 11. And honestly, I've used it to etch things in wood and stuff. And I roll one up in my pack. It often takes it in my pack as a backup method. If I had a pot and I wanted to concentrate that on a spot of a pot, I think in time I could boil water if I needed to. So there definitely is methods, right?
Well, I was going to say, there's a feller on the internet there, an old projection style TV. So we're talking, I don't know, his might be a little big, but you can get like the big magnifying sheets.
Yes.
He set one of these up. His was like 4 feet by 4 feet, and it was melting rock.
Yep. You can forge with those. But obviously that's a bit much, and you have to build a frame for it. Like he has a frame, he stretches it off. And I'm not going to argue that anyone couldn't create one of those in the bush. It would just be 4 or 5 relatively straight sticks and some good fishing line or paracord or snare wire, whatever, to brace it in. But yeah, you could make a frame and definitely create some definite heat with that.
But my thought process on this is you can get like those 8.5 by 11 full sheet magnifying sheets.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, it's not that expensive, right? So one of those would definitely put out enough heat, because my little magnifying glass that I carry in my fire kit, it obviously starts fires.
Yeah. So, I mean, you concentrate that down to a square inch. If you create, like I said, the letter size sheet into about a 1 inch spot on the side of your pot, and it would boil water. It would probably be hard to cook with it, like any other method, because
it's such a concentrated point.
Yeah, it's too hot to cook well, and you'll probably just like burn and have a lot of burned and uncooked stuff. But you can definitely boil water and use that as a method. Be careful though, because obviously if it's creating that kind of heat, if you leave it unattended, it could very well put heat where you don't intend it. And
I was going to say, start the forest fire that we're trying to prevent at this point. Another quick comment here. We have, let's see, Kier. I've seen people run a pressure cooker in their engine bays on long overland trips. Internal pressure stops any fumes from getting into your food, and it works as a slow cooker over time. And this is why I've never tried cooking anything off the exhaust and stuff. I'm always terrified something from the engine is going to seep in there. I always half-heartedly do stuff like this, I'm not going to lie. And it would be my luck that engine oil or something would leak into my food, you know what I mean? And I'd be stupid enough to be like, it's probably still edible.
Yeah, the underside of my engine does not seem to be the cleanest place that I would want to put food, but you definitely can. And if you seal the container and if you're careful about it, it's not only can it be done, it has been done, and it's been done very successfully. Keep in mind what you're doing, obviously. But the point is that there are heat options that are not necessarily fire that we can take advantage of. In other places in the world, there's hot springs. There's, I think it's Iceland and even the Azores. I've heard of people just burying a pot underground and it cooking. If you try that here, you will not. Most places.
We have the opposite thing here. If you bury something in the ground, depending how deep you go, it's a fridge.
Yeah. So, just know that there are some other options, and obviously those options should be considered. And the other option too is, if it's warm enough, there are no cooked meals.
Yes. Let me see.
So
sorry, I was just reading some comments here from Red Bear Tactical. And I was verifying it. The normal operating temperature of a cat engine is 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a good temperature to slow cook with. And I was going to tell the story, but I didn't really figure out a way to put it in. So I know porter operators and old skidder operators. That's exactly what they used to do. They used to throw some of their lunch, wrap it in tinfoil, and throw it in the engine bay of the skidder. And I mean, it used to cook. I was never brave enough to eat it or anything like that. But once again, I heard stories of this from the cook camps and things like that. I love my Optimus OmniFuel stove for cooking with. Runs on isobutane, kerosene, diesel. So much like the MSR stove that you got, the multi-fuel.
Yeah. It's akin to it. I mean, there's advantages to both. I would love to have both options so I could play with them and compare them. And maybe someday I will. But yeah, I mean, great options. And most of the year, these fire stoves are definitely okay. I mean, people use them. And you get up in the morning, there's nothing like having a great breakfast. And if you can't run the fire, then you can at least run a pot and boil some water, cook your bacon and eggs. It makes a big difference for your mornings. So it's something I enjoy.
Food always tastes better in the woods.
Well,
the same food that you would have on your kitchen table, you take it into the woods, tastes 100 times better.
It does. And there's anyone who's ever spent time camping and you wake up in the morning and you're the first one awake and you go out and you do your business, and then you take a few minutes, you get your stove going, you boil up a cup of tea or a coffee if you're a coffee drinker. I don't drink coffee, but and you go down and you sit on a rock by the edge of the lake or the river and you watch the sun come up. It is some of the most peaceful moments you will ever have in your life. It is an experience that I think everyone should experience at least once, and will probably want to experience it many times after they do. And that's it. It does involve having a good hot cup of something, hot chocolate, tea, coffee, whatever. A method we didn't mention, but I absolutely should be considered, the old thermos.
Yeah.
For trips, say a day to 24 hours, yeah, you can fill up a thermos and still have a pretty warm drink 24 hours later if you have a good quality vacuum flask style thermos. I
was going to say, during hunting season, I take a thermos of tea with me. We go in the morning before day breaks. I come out, there's usually still a little coffee left in it, and I will drink that coffee the next morning while I am waiting for my new pot of coffee to heat up to put back in the thermos. It's not blistering hot, but it's still hot. You know what I mean? It's just at that comfortable temperature to drink. And that is at least 24 hours, if not a little longer away.
For years, I had a job where boiling water wasn't impossible at the job. It just wasn't convenient. And I just went out and I bought like a cheap thermos, and I used to fill it up. I put 2 bags of tea in it, and I'd fill it up. I think it was like 1.5 liters. And at the end of the day, I still had hot tea, and I loved it. It was great. So it's a method. It definitely is a method. It's an option if you're out camping or hiking or whatever, and you want a hot drink and you think that fire or some kind of heating method is going to be frowned upon. Definitely consider that. You can do the same thing with some foods, especially, like I said, 24-hour trips. Means you can still have a piping hot breakfast if you prepare right. And there's a lot of stuff you can do to extend a thermos. So not leaving it out in the cold, or wrapping it in clothing inside your pack, because that means there's even less cold touching it, so the heat just doesn't have anywhere to escape.
You know what we used to do? Like, I think I've mentioned this in the past on previous podcasts. Yeah. When I was young, my grandparents used to pick brush, and if anybody doesn't know what that is, around Christmas time, you go out, you pick brush, literally the limbs off fir trees. Specifically, there's a knack to it. You got to get the good ones and stuff like that. Use it for making wreaths and Christmas decorations and things like that. People still do it today. But anyway, that's not the point. What we used to do to take our tea, put it in a mason jar and wrap it in newspapers, and then wrap like a tea towel or something around that. And that tea stayed hot all day.
Yeah. So, it's a great method. It's a great option to take into consideration. I think we've listed a lot of good ideas here. So some are more accessible than others. I think, as much as I would like to say that the chemical heating method is really accessible to everyone, honestly, I've only seen them at like upper end camping places and stuff. It's more of a specialty order. And not everyone has access to that. You could figure out the chemicals and create one yourself, I'm sure, but you want to be somewhat careful with that, obviously.
Some of those are going to be restricted chemicals depending on where you're at.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, different methods definitely work. There are definitely options that you can come across. If you have a power supply, you can obviously run a small electric heater of some type to cook with. Too small inverter, power supply, the power off your car, whatever. But I don't know of many people boiling water with a power bank.
Not a power bank, no. But when I did a little long haul truck driving, team driving with my dad, you can get those 12-volt ones that plug into your car and stuff, like you said, like the 12-volt coffee pots. There was a 12-volt lunch can that literally just slow cooked things. We've done stuff like that. Just a couple comments here to catch us up. Red Bear Tactical, I've had a rigger leave a can of pop in a cup holder of a truck and leave it, turn up the heat, and boil the can till it exploded while the truck ran overnight. Something very therapeutic about the sound and smell of white gas stove making a cup of coffee in the woods, and I agree to that.
Yes.
I love a liquid fuel stove, and it's just that kind of kerosene smell or white gas, whatever you happen to have there while it's making your food. I mean, some people don't like it. I'm with Red Bear. It's super therapeutic. Kier, one of the truck drivers I work with, will put his sandwiches on the turbo a half hour before lunch to toast them. A quick story on this. When I worked for Natural Resources in the parks, I used to take my sandwiches, and I always wrap my sandwiches in tinfoil. I never did the sandwich bag thing. I don't know why. It was just old school, I guess. And I used to leave them on the dash of like the Gators and stuff like that, like John Deere Gators or the, what was the other brand there, the Kubotas. And they'll have black dashes. And the darn things would actually toast a little just from the heat of the sun. Spore, is charcoal allowed during a ban? Thought I read that on the website. So charcoal, it depends how you're using it. Here's the other thing that you got to check in a lot of your provincial regulations. Here in Nova Scotia, anytime there's a fire ban in the province, doesn't necessarily count the camping parks. You have to look into that. There is specialty fire bans where the camping parks will be included, but generally, even if there's a fire ban in the province, you go to a camping park, you're still allowed to burn. They have some suppression supplies and stuff on site, and it gives them the ability to do it. Check with them when you go in to be sure. Now, charcoal in general, if it's like in a barbecue, then you're still just cooking with a barbecue. They can't really say a whole lot to you about that. If you are like using it in a fire pit situation, I think that's going to be up to the discretion of the officer that investigates it, honestly. Okay, let's see. Red Bear. I take an extra large Stanley thermos to work every day. Yep. It's usually gone by noon.
Well, I mean, some people go through more than others. Yeah. Leave
it at that.
When we made the statement was like the sound of a white gas stove cooking. It immediately brought to mind. Do you remember the show Newfoundland Outdoors?
Yep.
Lloyd and Bryce were the two guys, and I quickly looked it up while we were there, and it's actually touted as possibly the world's first reality show.
Seriously?
That was a statement on there. I'm sure there's competition, but it was popular in the early 80s. And it was just two guys with a couple of video cameras that recorded their hunting trips and their successes and failures going brook trout. And it was just such a peaceful thing to watch, and he narrated it over it, and that's a scene that I can kind of often picture, just them cooking a meal. Way before YouTube and all this stuff was even a thought or a thing, these guys were doing it. They were the original outdoor bushcrafters on TV, in my opinion. So
I'm gonna have to look that up now.
Yeah, look it up. He's got a book apparently and everything.
Oh, sweet. I remember seeing and hearing about it when I was a kid. I haven't thought about it in years though, Ben. That's really pulling on the old memory strings, man.
I mean, he died in 2004,
Okay, so Spore, it says charcoal barbecues can only be used with briquettes. I'm thinking like a hibachi grill. Uh, any advice I give you on this is going to be nothing more than a guess. I am going to suggest contacting your local natural resources office. I don't want to give bad information to you, man. I would think, because I'm going to say something here. Take it with a grain of salt. This is not law. I haven't looked into this in years. I haven't worked for natural resources in going on 15 years or something like that. Maybe not. Anyway, it's been a while. Once upon a time, there used to be a subsequent bylaw that said any fire that was used for heat, light, or cooking was exempt from fire bans anyway. That has since changed, but I don't know what it has changed into. Now, if you are using it for the sake of cooking within an instrument that was designed to use it, I'm thinking you would be okay. But once again, that's just a guess. Give Natural Resources a call. They're going to be the up and down. They're the ones that set the precedence on a lot of this open burning stuff. In most provinces, the jurisdiction of forest fires falls under natural resources, not so much the fire departments. Fire departments are trained to fight structure fires, rescue people, and stuff like that. Not that they're not trained to fight forest fires, don't get me wrong. They have a lot of good training there, but the specialty usually falls to natural resources or renewable resources, depending on the province you're in, and that's who you're going to want to get in contact to get a very specific answer on that. Because here in Nova Scotia, which I know this is what we're talking about for, everything's just so sticky here right now.
Yeah. Anyways, have we captured everything we were hoping to capture? Or have we still got
sorry, I'm still just checking out the comments here. I remember when the cooking fire was exempted and that when it changed. Yeah. Once again, I'm kind of diving off the deep end here and getting slightly away, but just to answer Spore's comment here, I was working for Natural Resources back when any fire was still available as long as it was for heat, light, or cooking. And when I worked in the fire crews and we were going to tell people to put the campfires out, or not the campfires, but any burning they were doing, brush fires, bonfires, whatever you want to call it, they'd always just have a pack of hot dogs or some marshmallows. And we'd have to leave because that would be a fire that was for cooking. And then people got kind of wise to this and started abusing the system, and this is when it all changed. So, a couple bad apples ruined for everybody. But yeah, it has changed. But I think in the instance, like you're saying with the briquettes there, as long as it's designed to do it, you're probably okay. But that's just a guess. Once again, contact Natural Resources. I'm not going to give you the yes or no on this because anything I'm saying is literally just a guess, man, and I don't want to give you bad information.
And you always have to check local listings and regulations or rules. Because honestly, state to state, province to province, county to county, community to community, the rules may or may not change. And, I think in general, if it's a life and death situation, there is sort of and you're using common sense, you will be fine. But,
I don't want you running out there and saying Robert and Ben said it was fine, because I'm saying I think it's okay, but I don't know for sure. Seek higher education. The people that are actually going to ticket you and send out fines, most likely going to be conservation officers that are being employed by Natural Resources or Department of Environment, so might as well go to the horse's mouth. But yeah, as for tonight, I think I've talked about everything I want to talk about. Like I said, this was just kind of a quickie episode, which we're still running up to almost 50 minutes, like I said, Ben. Yeah. About just getting in the mindset of looking at alternatives, especially as the fire bans are going to roll in. Just like Spore said, I noticed today that most of the province was a moderate, and here we are, it's only April 10th. You know what I mean? Like, this should be the wet time of the year, and they're already starting to throw fire restrictions at us. So the Farmer's Almanac and the Weather Network and all that stuff, they're predicting it's going to be a very hot, dry year in this side of the country, and that it's just going to continue to get worse as time goes forward. And this is going to be more and more of our realization, folks. Yeah, we still want to go out in the woods and play, but we're going to have to be more and more careful about it, or they'll start putting. Well, last year they had woods bans on. You just couldn't go in the woods. Straight up, you weren't allowed in the woods.
Yeah. And we definitely want to avoid that. And the best way to avoid that is when we are in the woods, be as responsible as you can. Don't do stupid things. It should go without saying, but if you're thinking maybe I shouldn't do this, then don't do it. Um, yeah, and it's because a cigarette butt or the exhaust of a motorcycle or an RTV or whatever. Any of these things can start a fire pretty easily. Garbage, people leaving glass bottles and stuff out can start a fire. I watched that happen in my mother's yard the other year. She had a drinking glass set on a table, and I looked over and the rag next to it was smoking. And I reached it was just about to burst into flames. So
now, once again, old statistics, this could have changed. When I was working for Natural Resources, 90% of forest fires were man-made. That doesn't mean somebody went out and set a fire with a lighter. That means a cigarette butt out the window, a discarded bottle in the woods, yada, yada, yada. A lot of people always used to think, forest fires happen because of lightning strikes. Yes, there are some lightning strike fires. I'm not saying it's not a thing, but 90% of the time were like man-made fires from one way or another. And exactly as Ben said, take your garbage out. You don't want the pop can sitting out there. You don't want the pop bottle, the glass bottle, the mason jar, whatever. Because these could all potentially create problems. If you do smoke, don't just pitch your butt out into the woods. Make sure it's out. Find a water source. Drown that sucker. Let's see. Red Bear Tactical. Sometimes, let's see. There are different levels of fire bans here, and we kind of get that too, but not like him. He's saying that sometimes you're allowed to burn up to a half a meter and stuff like that. Here, it's more just the time of burning. We can have an open burn day, which means you can burn from 2 p.m. to 5 a.m. You can have a restricted day, which means you can go from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. A no burn day, which is just obviously you can't burn, and then full provincial fire ban, which is you can't burn anywhere, and then there's like that full woods ban where you just can't go in the woods. And I had never even heard about that kind of a ban up until just a couple of years ago, where they're like, yeah, we're just not letting you in the woods anymore. And there was a massive kickback here about like, how can you stop us from going in the woods? They did it. That's all I can say. So learn from not our mistake, but maybe our experience here in Eastern Canada. If you don't think they can do it, that just means they haven't figured out a way how to push it through yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anytime they look and say it's for our own good, then they're going to come up with a way to do it. So just don't give them that excuse is the best advice I'd give people for things like that. Anyways, yeah, thanks for coming out. I think we can wrap it up here, though. And
yeah, we could have wrapped it up about 10 minutes ago. I just keep
you on line here, buddy.
But anyway, that's it for me for tonight. I said everything I want to once again. It was just a topic to get people thinking about some alternatives, because the reality is this is going to happen more and more often. There is going to be more burn bans. There is going to be more woods bans, especially here in Eastern Canada. It's becoming more of a thing. Western Canada, it's going to be more of a thing. Out where you're at, Ben, like Slave Lake and stuff like that, there's been massive fires out there. They're going to start doing the same thing.
Yep, for sure. Fires are a real thing, and it's a real problem, and we have to take care. Cool. Anyways, we'll see you guys next week. I'm sure we'll have another interesting, exciting topic. And thank you, everyone, who joined and participated and commented.
Night, everybody. See you next week. All right, shut down on my end, Ben, if you ever shut down on your end.
Oh, shoot. I'm